With our two-piece mold done, today we're casting up the first pieces from it. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Michael Makes Everything. So on today's episode, we've got time to get this new two-piece mold poured. So we are going to basically pour this with our trusty Merlins Magic dental plaster. And what I'm doing right now is I'm spraying the two halves of our two-piece mold down with a surfactant. Now the surfactant, otherwise known as a Debubblizer, will help the plaster get into all the little nooks and crannies of the mold and get the bubbles off of the surface. Now I plan on making some sort of a form to hold this two-piece mold together better, but temporarily I'm using some Lego blocks on the end, and then I'm going to put some rubber bands in the middle of this mold just to apply some pressure to it. We want even pressure across the mold. We don't want it to be really strong in any one spot. Otherwise you could deform the shape of the mold and come out with parts that aren't exactly what you intended. Make sure that you get the little reference marks lined up well so that the mold turns out without a lot of seams to it. So we're going to mix up our Merlin's Magic plaster, and I'm making up about 3 ounces of it. But unfortunately I wound up with a little bit of extra plaster, so you'll see towards the end of this video I went ahead and I poured another mold with the excess plaster that I had. So when you mix the plaster, what you are looking for is you're looking for absorption and for it to be fairly thick enough that it coats your stir rod. But you don't want it to be so thick that it's almost like a paste. So what I usually look for is for the plaster to float a little bit on the surface of the mixed plaster. That's why I add this in batches as I'm mixing it up. By looking for that float, I have a good idea of just how much of this plaster is actually mixed into the product. This is a non-Newtonian fluid, which means that as you stir it, it will become a liquid again, even though you're really dealing with dry time, and it will allow it to harden no matter what. Plaster that is left sitting can be stirred and it will become a liquid again, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon when you're actually mixing this stuff. So I've sped up the video a little bit just because that two-piece mold is now on our vibrator, and we are going to use the rest of this plaster just to fill another mold. I came a little bit short and I just mixed a quick batch of the remaining so that I could fill the whole mold. And this is another sewer tile wall mold. So now that I've got that poured, we'll switch them out, give the second mold a little bit of a chance to vibrate, and you can see I just added a few drops more of plaster. We're going to give this 5 minutes, and then we are going to scrape both molds. Now you are basically just scraping the water off of the surface, but you can see that I am very careful to not allow it to be a divot under the surface of the mold. And now 30 minutes, and we'll cut ahead. So our mold takes, in my environment, about 30 minutes for it to fully set. And once set, you'll notice that your plaster has gone through a color change and it has become noticeably harder. Now this plaster is not fully dried, but it is dry enough that we are able to demold these. I can actually give this a little less than 30 minutes, but I erred on the side of caution today just because I didn't want to mess up any of these pieces. If you pull them too soon, they will crumble in your hands, and if you wait too long, they're almost impossible to get out of your mold. So there's a magic time that you want to actually pull these. Now our two-piece mold is great because it's going to separate right down the middle. That's why we made it like we did. And these pieces should easily come out with just a little bit of stretching of the mold. So we have two pieces, and these allow us to do essentially either little tiny tight passageways, or we can put grills and grates in there, or we could do like a pipe sticking out with liquid. You can see the mold line that is running around this mold. That's to be expected, and you'll need to do a little bit of cleanup, but the nice thing about these is because they're wall pieces, they'll be up against another wall piece, so it won't be very noticeable. And that mold line is on both pieces. If you can disguise it in the bricks, it's a lot less noticeable than if you actually put it dead center in the middle of a stone. So that's something to keep in mind when you're actually making the mold. But all in all, this is a really great casting, especially our first casting from these new molds. I'm very happy with them. Now these need to post-cure at this point, so I'll put them in a dehydrator and we'll leave them for about 3 hours to just fully dry out. But just real quickly to show you, this is a pipe piece that I cast the other day, and it gives you an idea of what we can do with these pieces that have holes going through them. I'll be able to glue that up, and then I can do whatever water effect I want to make it look like, you know, sludge is spewing out of that pipe into our sewer system. So let's go ahead and we'll demold our second mold, and this is the one that we cast with the extra plaster that we had mixed. Now these are wall pieces for the most part. There's a couple of corner pieces in here, and there is a ladder piece. So right now I'm pulling out a full-size section of wall, which is probably the most useful piece in this entire mold. Next we have an inside corner piece, and the inside corner pieces allow you to make those 90-degree turns. Following that up, we have a section of straight wall. Now this is a 1x1 straight wall instead of a 1x2, which allows us to put it in combination with some of the other small pieces. Now we have our ladder piece that's coming out, which is a 1x1, but it has those rungs going up. And finally we have an outside corner piece, which is a 1x1. Now this is the most difficult of all of these pieces to release from this mold. It actually probably should have been done as a two-piece mold. I've broken this piece a couple of times, but they glue back together fairly nice, so I'm not too worried about using this mold in the future. So that's it for the second mold that we made. And as you can see, our pieces really combine well, and they do an excellent job at conveying that sewer look on the small scale. So as always guys, thank you for checking out the video, and make sure and leave me any comments or questions that you have. Hey, if you like these videos and want to help me keep making them, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button.